everybody, and welcome to another edition of There's a Will. In the studio with me today are the estimable Ivo Bender, professor, I call him. I don't know why I call him that. Probably there's something wrong with me.
I profess a lot of things.
You do profess, that's true. And, or it could just be a personality problem on my part. And we have just have a look at him, Nicholas Richardson. No relation.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is our core group. I remember 2 years ago when we sat in this very studio and we predicted the outcomes of COVID when we were just absolutely right about virtually everything. Isn't it nice to be right?
It is.
It gets boring.
It didn't do us any good.
Exactly.
It didn't do us any good. Yeah, Nicholas is always vociferous about his humility, and that's one of his great qualities.
It is one of my...
You have many great qualities.
Many great qualities, yes.
That's another.
Including modesty, which I would put at the top of the list.
Yeah, you put modesty right up there. And a lot to be modest about.
Indeed.
Yeah. We practiced that before.
Well,
Did I deliver that
did.
okay? Yeah, okay. At any rate, I just want to say that if I had a time machine and I could go back in time, I wouldn't kill Hitler. I wouldn't kill him. I'd admit him to art school. I think it would save the situation, wouldn't it? But what would you do about Putin? I think if you could go back in time, would you kill Putin?
No. I don't think killing people, that's not the issue. The issue is we have to be responsible ourselves. And many of the things which, if we're talking about Ukraine, many of the things which encouraged Mr. Putin to have a go, or President Putin, have a go at Ukraine are in our, and I'm talking about the West, in our own hands. I mean, he thought this was an opportunity because he thought the West was become too decadent, too unwilling to defend itself or to defend Ukraine, too unwilling to give up the comforts that we all enjoy, particularly the Germans. That was a calculation. And so he thought he'd have a go at Ukraine. What has surprised me, and in fact rather reassured me, is how united the West has become. In actual fact, even the Germans are now sending heavy weaponry to Ukraine, something which would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, and something which reverses for them a whole post-war settlement of not being involved militarily in anything in another country. And this is remarkable.
Well, I think it's great as long as they keep their eyes off of Warsaw.
Yes, well, I think they will. I mean, whether the Russians will keep their eyes on Warsaw, given half a chance. No, but seriously,
Lord,
and it
never stops.
Macron was saying a few months ago, NATO is brain dead. Well, look how that's changed. The whole infrastructure, the whole approach to the world has changed. We're much more united now. And hopefully some of these Maoist revolutionaries who hitherto were running around the West, pulling down statues of great American leaders like Jefferson, generally bleating about everything, trying to redate the founding of the United States to 1619 or whatever it was.
No, that's the first slaves.
Yeah, but whatever it is, the point is, hopefully now people wake up and think, no, there are more important issues in the world than indulging our own rather weird fantasies.
Yes, although weird fantasies have their place too.
Yes.
And speaking of weird fantasies, Ivo, I'd just like to say that I would not go back and kill Mr. Putin. I'd make him taller. Just make him taller.
Or you could make his taxi driving more successful. He could have had a whole fleet of taxis.
That's correct. And that might have, if he was the biggest taxi, the owner of the greatest taxi fleet in Moscow.
Well, then there would have been
or regional. One. Could be regional, not just Moscow.
There would have been another one. So, of course, I don't want to absolve this this man of what he's doing, but he is a product of hundreds of years of history that have created this entity we call Russia. It was, or rather, bent its course. The original Rus was on a course of becoming a normal country in Europe. And it was the Mongol invasion that has really sort of thrown everything out of whack, and actually that's why there are such great differences between the choices that are taken by Russians as compared to Ukrainians or Belarusians, right? Because they have been much less affected by this extremely cruel rule that resulted in the adoption of this awful system that Russia has been run by for the past 500 years, ever since the Mongols were pushed out, but really because of their own squabbles, not because of some major military victories. But anyway, it really is a civilizational issue. It's a question of the awful political system that was established in Russia 500 years ago, or even before that. So, and which caused this paranoia, which was best described by Catherine, who, for some reason outside of Poland, is known as Catherine the Great, who basically said that
she was very large.
She was probably very large.
Yeah.
There are stories about that, but anyway,
she liked horses.
I wouldn't get into that particular
apparently
tale.
I'm just
equestrian sport. But anyway, so basically she
I
said...
didn't bring up, Richard Gere.
She was okay. Okay, Gatfeld. Anyway, so she was the one who verbalized this, that Russia has to expand, or it will perish, right? It was a way of life, the choice. You know, when you're ruling a country, you have a choice. You can either adopt, mercantile and agricultural ways of feeding a population, or you can adopt robbery. And Russia has been, throughout its history, very often choosing the latter. And why? Again, because this was this ruthlessness and this paranoia and the fear of having a weak leader.
That's how we got onto
which
this.
resulted
the strong leader versus
the weak leaders of the Rus, when it was divided, were conquered by the Mongols. Hence, we have to have a strong leader to defend us from the Mongols.
Yeah.
But in the process, we become the horde.
Mongol-like.
We become the horde.
We become like them. Yeah, because even in the First World War, just after the First World War, the 1920-21 war, the Cossacks, who were attacking on their ponies across from Ukraine into southern Poland to come up and meet the Soviet advance on Warsaw. They were, we know the story well, they were a sort of a remnant or an idea going all the way back to those previous Mongol invasions. It's in the blood, isn't it, out here? And people don't, I'm glad you brought this up, because people don't realize how close that Mongol history is, even though it's 700 years and 800 years ago and like that. And the Turkish, also, the Turkish invasion against Vienna was a reminder of that kind of thing. Yeah.
Of a true clash of civilizations.
Right.
And when they literally clash.
But do we have a clash? We have a lot to talk about today, and we're going to have a special report. We're going to have a special report from our reporter Michal, who's on his way to Donbas today, now, and he just sent a report to us. So we're going to look at that later. Perhaps start off the second half with that, and then comment on it, and talk about war aims and what's going on in that part. But just to continue with this subject, though, we had a guy on last week, a sinologist, and we were talking about the Asian mind. It was really interesting. Very smart guy. You remember?
Yeah, I do.
Last week,
There, yes.
Olgierd Bielski. Yeah, wasn't that right? No, yeah.
You're the man with the notepad.
Gosh, I forgot his last name now.
Anyway, he's very interesting.
Yeah, he was great. We're going to have him back. Olgierd, anyway. That was his first name, which is a very nice old Polish name. You don't hear that often.
Actually, Lithuanian. To be
Is it Lithuanian?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just corrected all the time. I don't mind. Correct me, because I'm
we were one country for about 500 years as well. So,
well, yeah, but I mean, these names, they need clarification. But yeah, very interesting guy. And we talked about the Asian mind, so it's interesting. I think a lot of people, what you're saying is interesting. a lot of people, when they look at this situation, they don't know, unless they've done a lot of reading, and they're very familiar with the territory. It's all very hazy, this history. It's very confusing to people. But there are certain roots that remain very strong, and one of them is this Mongol invasion. Another one is the clash with the old Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic conversion of that with Catholicism, Holy Roman Empire, etc. These things continue. Those are two of the big ones. The other one is the Russian-Polish thing in the newer times, epitomized in the occupation of partition. Warsaw was under Russia, for example. And then the German, Prussian, and the Knights.
Teutonic Knights.
Teutonic Knights, yeah.
yes.
The Teutonic Knights from Aalborg. That is another very strong strain. And then you have the Austrians, who kind of, well, let's have some fun. The goulash is good. And sort of leave people alone, and manage to run an empire in the most laissez-faire way in European history, I think, would appear to be. So these strains run through. And once you get some idea of these strains, then you can start to put it all together. You almost need to get a big board, do a mind map, put in, yes. Your centuries, and then sort of fill in the blanks. And then you can begin to understand this. Like Michener did a good job in his book by following some families through history in a very simple way, almost
it's
like
interesting. I mean, his books.
Yeah.
He wrote these big books because I don't know if you read it. Well, you probably did read his obituary in The Economist when he died many years ago. They said actually Michener saw himself as a writer, but a writer of these epic novels, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, The Economist said really, if you look at his writing, he was really a teacher.
Yeah,
and
he's like an historian teacher.
Exactly,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
he would have been a great historian, oblique history teacher,
Yeah.
and not really trying to novelize the things.
Yeah.
And his book on Poland, which I must admit I gave up on page 122, something I never do.
You remember it was 122?
I remember, because I never give up. I'm one of these people who read a book from cover to cover, no matter how bad it is if I've started it. But unfortunately with Michener's, and it was the really poor dialogue between the characters. It was a good book, but many people have said that actually if you wanted a potted history of Poland, then Michener's book Poland is a pretty good place to start, actually, as a piece of history.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was saying. Just as a story, it's like but it brings you in and you get a sense of all these different conflicts, and it's referred to. Or even, the story like The Trumpeter of Krakow is a very good way to get into the understanding of medieval Poland based around Krakow and the, Kazimierz and all those people, and the invasion of the Mongols. But the Golden Horde. Right.
The Golden Horde.
And part of the issue is we live in an era now where a lot of the politicians are ignorant of history, or they willfully ignorant of history. In recent British history.
But wait a second. History is before my time.
Yes, of course. Well, exactly.
I'm not responsible
one
for
of the
that.
most famous, of course, was Tony Blair, who seemed to take pride in the fact he claimed to know no history.
Oh, he
Whereas
said
if you look
that?
at the great
He
leaders,
didn't
if you
say
look
that,
at he did say it at one point.
He said, I don't know any
Yes.
history, I don't care.
Yeah, but that's essentially his attitude. Whereas you look at someone like Churchill, of course, he was
Churchill's
steeped in history. And
Yeah.
part of the reason was he didn't go to university. After Harrow, he went into the army, stationed in India, where there was not much to do apart from play polo and exercise
Yeah.
the horses a couple of times a day. So his mother sent him lots of the great English historians, which had two effects. One, he knew a lot of history, far more than any of his contemporaries in the cabinet who'd studied classics at Oxford or Cambridge. But two, it gave him this command of the language, which of course we saw to great effect during the Second World War. And in a funny sort of way, I suppose, Zelensky in Ukraine started life as a comedian and other things, and nobody would have thought he would be the man for the occasion. But like Churchill in 1940, Zelensky has risen to the occasion. He is the right man at the right time. Now, he may do nothing else. He may do nothing else in his career. People may write him off as some stupid, some stupid comedian who just had a lucky break. But the point is, for the people of Ukraine today, and for Ukraine as a country today, Zelensky, I cannot imagine, after the other very wealthy people of rather dubious loyalties, perhaps, who have been running Ukraine up to this point, Zelensky is the man. And without Zelensky, which is presumably why the Russians have tried to, get rid of him, reportedly
Well,
on
I
a
think the
number of occasions.
Klitschkos have been a factor too,
Yeah.
right beside him. There's two pillars
Yeah,
with
I
their
mean,
international fame
They have
and just
international fame,
representing
but also
strength.
they do represent
They represent strength.
literally, of course, as champion boxers, heavyweight
Yeah,
boxers.
it was Klitschko, either one of those guys, Mike Tyson and those guys, those kind of, Muhammad Ali, they're
So why
great
is
boxers,
the
great
situation in
athletes.
Ukraine is obviously very bad for Ukrainians and so forth. At least, if there is a silver lining to this cloud, it is that at least at this time the people at the centre who are making the decisions, trying to encourage the world to support Ukraine, are probably the best people they could have to do that.
Eva?
Well, yes, the situation is dire, but if you look at it from a bit of a perspective, Ukraine, as you know, it literally means at the edge or at borderlands. So Ukraine was always faced with a choice, and in the 17th century, that choice was made for Russia, which had then tragic.
What was the other choice?
The other choice, well, the lands at that time were being contested by Poland, Russia, and Turkey, right? So the people there operated in this triangle of great powers at that time. So the choice for Russia was made.
Right.
But there's tremendous also Western influence from Poland. And so the choice for Russia then resulted in a chain of tragedies. And I think, including the Great Famine of the 1930s, which was created by Stalin in order to break the Ukrainians.
It's called the
Holodomor.
Holodomor.
And it resulted in millions of people literally starved to death by their state, right, by their government. But anyway, so these choices of being on the edge, I think we are now seeing a moment in which this that it was now known as the Pereyaslav Accord, that it's being reversed in a sense, that it is over for Russia's domination over Ukraine, because it was not a partnership, it was a domination and an exploitation, and then actual genocide in the 30s.
But it's
so
not
anyway,
brought up
so
more,
if-
this
so-
1930s thing.
So if we are not, that's
In
also
this
true.
context.
That's also true. So in that sense, if they're not vaporized by Russia, which is still
Possible.
absolutely possible,
We're going to talk about it in the second half.
but if they're not vaporized and they survive, they will have ceased to be on the edge.
Yeah.
They will become a member of the Western world. And that is momentous. It changes a lot of things. And you could argue that it really changes the whole geopolitical tectonics. So I
was
would
just thinking,
argue
that's exactly the phrase I was looking for.
I would argue
What a coincidence.
I would argue that we are actually witnessing the beginning of the 21st century unfold in front of our eyes. The beginning of centuries usually come a little later than the actual date.
Yeah.
So in the case of the 20th century, it was 1914. So this is the 1914 moment, and God help us.
Yeah, because we don't know what's going to happen. And I remember just a few weeks ago, there were people refusing to talk about the fact that Putin was possibly psychopathic, that Putin was possibly very ill, that there might be a nuclear confrontation or even the use of there were people just wanted to deny, not even speak about it. You have to speak about these things, but on the other hand, you have to be. It's very. I find some news reports where people are just going, "Yes, this is what will happen if there's a nuclear." And it's like, what are you talking about? I saw that movie. It doesn't end well, right?
Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it last weekend, actually.
Yeah, they traded cities, didn't they? Yeah, I would recommend everybody to watch Dr. Strangelove to understand the sense of humor, which is very appropriate in the sense of the darkness of the subject. Because how do you talk about? We're now talking about annihilation. It's not in a film. It's actually in reality. And we're just talking about it. I mean, I called Ivo the other day, and I said, how are you there, Ivo? He goes, just waiting for vaporization. I said, oh, God, here we go. But, and then it's right through the news reports. So how do you talk about, I mean, we'll get to this later, but I think it's a question we'll save till after the break, if we may, but how do you talk about this without making it mundane and just commonplace? It's something you can't approach that way. It's like approaching the Holocaust in a mundane, way. You have to approach, these are sacred subjects. These are about existence and non-existence of us as a species. Although some people say, this is the part that kills me. Oh, well, there'll just be nuclear winter for a while, and some people will have tuna fish underground, and they'll survive. It's like, what?
Unlikely, I think.
Yeah, what are they going to eat when they come out,
exactly.
right? Yeah, how are they going to grow? Yeah, they're going to eat, I guess, survive on 20-year-old tuna fish. It didn't work for the Russian army recently, did it?
No.
Yeah.
Well, nothing worked for the Russian army recently, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is
which
an example of
crazy
poor trading, poor equipment. All this money which the Russians allegedly spent on re-equipping their armed forces seems to have gone into the back pockets of somebody in houses in Kensington in London or wherever. That's the only conclusion one can reach. But the Russian army has always been bad in terms of ill-disciplined. What we're seeing now, we're seeing women being raped, children attacked, just general civilians murdered, looting of houses and sending the most ridiculous things back. I mean, the Ukrainians have this footage from a local post office of people sending really pathetic things back to Russian soldiers, and pathetic things back, which must tell us a lot about the...
What are the soldiers sending back?
Well, all sorts of sort of household appliances.
Oh, I found an iron.
Yes, that sort of thing.
Literally.
Yes, and of course they're also now, the Russians in
Now
typical in typical fashion in Ukraine, they're now stealing large amounts of grain from barns in Ukraine. I mean, this is pathetic. This is sort of 19th century basic stuff, which they repeated in the Second World War by...
Well, it's Cossack behavior.
Yeah,
and
stealing railway lines and dismantling factories and things.
Did you hear about when they took a bunch of harvesting equipment and sent it back to Russia, and of course as soon as the stuff was stolen, they just flipped the switch, which made it impossible to use the stuff. So they moved all this stuff all the way to Russia, and then doesn't start. No, dummy, because it's called modern technology.
Well, exactly.
You can't just go around stealing things.
Well, this is a problem. Russia, I think, as a state, there seems to have been most other parts of the world have had some sort of revolution over in history, or more than one, where there has been a sort of people in the general sense have sort of got together when things have got too bad and sort of replaced the government. That's never happened in Russia. And I discount the 1917 revolution because that was clearly manipulated by a couple of very clever people at the top, Lenin and his cronies. So that wasn't really a popular uprising as such. Yeah. I mean, where has been, and I appreciate...
Don't forget Trotsky.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I appreciate...
equally important in that beginning.
Yeah, I appreciate that it's very hard to be brave in a country where secret policemen might destroy you or your families. But where is the Russian equivalent? And I would be delighted to be corrected. Where's the Russian equivalent, even in recent days, of the protests there were in Belarus after the disputed presidential election, the solidarity movement in Poland at the beginning.
Why don't the Russians...
The Maidan uprising or revolution or taking to the streets in 2014 in Ukraine. Why do the Russian people as a whole
It goes back to Ivo's point. I fear that they want a strong ruler and they stand in line. Okay, I got to end the segment, but let me just relate something I was watching before I came out, interviewing people on the street in Russia about what they thought about the war. And this one young guy just went, he just went on and on, conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. The Western elites bought off the Russian elites. Just total, like the protocols of the elders of Zion. And total myth-making stuff that obviously had been fed.
Created, by the way, by the Okhrana.
Yes.
Interesting.
Right.
I think where the Western elites are guilty is they allowed the Russian elites to rape their own country economically and spend the proceeds in the United Kingdom, elsewhere in Europe, in the United States, in expensive yachts, houses.
Which all goes back to Putin anyway, because apparently they're just holding companies for Putin. Anyway, we have to end this segment. Very interesting. That flew by.
He
I
did.
hope everybody enjoyed that. We'll be back. We'll be back after the break. We're going to have a report from our correspondent on his way to the Donbas. Very exciting stuff. Then we'll be talking about that and covering some of my topics. On my notes, I made notes. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. How about that? That intro's not bad, isn't it? It's kind
Not
of
bad
fun,
at all.
isn't it? Yeah. You know that song?
You perform it, don't you?
Yeah, and I wrote it with Robert Brylewski,
Wow.
who is one of the most famous of the Polish rock
He was a
musicians.
legend of the Polish
Yeah.
independence/punk
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
He's a legend.
Yeah, he's a great man.
I've seen you performing with your band.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that Irish pub that they shut down.
Here, Irish pub. Yeah, they shut it down. Yeah, Irish. The that song is called "All Roads Lead to Poland." It's
'Cause they
prophetic.
do.
Prophetic, wasn't it?
Apart from those that lead to Rome.
It's no.
The roads from Rome lead to Poland.
Yeah, that's
It's-
right.
If you know,
No,
just
This is the crossroads.
you know.
Crossroads of history and of commerce, etc.
But I would actually argue that it's a provable geopolitical fact. You cannot control the world if you do not control Eurasia. You cannot control Eurasia, or Asia cannot control Europe, or Europe cannot control Asia without that pivot in the middle, which is Poland.
And that's why I first came here, to find out. And it's been years and years. But
Which sometimes is a terrible thing for Poland, sometimes it's great.
well, yeah, and the best and the worst. Well, there were two things. One, I was like, I wasn't like. I mean, I was looking at Poland and I said, why is it that whenever Poland is unstable, there's a huge problem? I want to know why. I didn't know why. I don't want to just read about it. I want to see what's there and what it looks like and what the people are like. The other thing was that the very best and the very worst of the 20th century in the world happened here. The epitomes of depravity and horror, as well as of freedom and enlightenment, took place here. And I find that incredible. And people should take note of that. These things aren't accidents, right?
I'm glad I didn't have to say that, then it would have sounded biased, but you know, since you're not Polish, I would like to thank you on behalf of all the Poles.
Well, I'm an historian, and I think what I'm saying is true.
It is true.
Demonstrably true.
It is demonstrably
Yeah,
true.
I should write at least a monograph or something about this. You know?
No, but as you said,
Because I'm full of enthusiasm. I spent a lot of time studying
when
the subject.
Poland is weak, the neighbors are and their big neighbors are encouraged to take advantage of the situation, and that creates continental conflagrations.
Yeah, and remember, we have to remember too, Poland was one of those big neighbors too, at various points. Particularly, one of my favorite a guy I'd love to meet in history is Kazimierz the Great, of the 1300s, the latter 1300s, who built all the castles and allowed the Jewish people to come here and trade and live, because he knew that commerce was important, built the grain trade and all those things. I mean, you know, the guy's amazing. And Poland became a really, really important and powerful country, and negotiated with the Teutonic Knights and things like that to bring them in, but also try and keep them under control a bit. You know? So it's fascinating stuff. Anyway, but I think we should look at this report,
Indeed.
which we got just a few hours ago from Michal Trzezniewski, who's on his way to. We've had Michal before,
we have,
a couple, 3 times on the show, and he's on his way to Donbas right now, and he's going to be in the southern part and right up against it. So let's see. I think we have Michal's report now. Would that be right? Okay. Producer's telling me yes.
Hello Will, hello everyone. We are in Donbas right now with Mikołaj Efimenko, with our operator. We were in Siewierodonetsk yesterday and we are going to Siewierodonetsk right now. It is one of the hottest points in the Battle of Donbas. So it is the hottest point or one of the hottest points in the entire Ukraine. So in Siewierodonetsk before the war lived like 140,000 of people. Right now there is like 50,000, so most of people were evacuated. Those who are still in Siewierodonetsk, they are very elderly or they want to protect their flats till the end. But in general, many people left Siewierodonetsk because Siewierodonetsk is shelled all the time. But in Siewierodonetsk right now there is no electricity, there is no water, current water, there is no also connection of phones. So yeah, the situation is very difficult. But Russian troops are not in Siewierodonetsk right now. They are in the outskirts of this city. First of all, they are in Rubizhne. They are also in Popasna, which is southward from Siewierodonetsk. On this line, from Popasna to Rubizhne and further Kreminna, there are like more than 50,000 of Russian troops. And this is one of the three main lines of assault in Donbas area. So Russians attacked from three directions. First of all, from Izium, which is Kharkov Oblast, and from Izium they go down to Słowiańsk, and in Izium area there is like 22,000 of Russian soldiers. This information came from British intelligence. Around Siewierodonetsk and in Popasna, which is a bit lower than Siewierodonetsk, there are like 50,000 of troops, Russian troops. So we have Izium, we have Siewierodonetsk, two lines of aggression, and we have also the third line, which goes from Donetsk and from occupied Donetsk Oblast and also Zaporozhia Oblast. Russians want to encircle first of all Siewierodonetsk and Lysychansk, and they want to kill all the, let's say, Ukrainian soldiers which are over there. But Ukrainians are very strong in that position. They have fortified 45 lines around Siewierodonetsk, around Avdiivka, which is close to Donetsk, close to Izium, around Słowiańsk. So Ukrainians have very fortified position, and Russia cannot break through for a few weeks. So probably they will do anything, and they will lost this battle the same as they lost it around Kyiv. So we are going to Siewierodonetsk right now. It is very close to the front line, to the line zero, like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 or 5 kilometers from the Russian positions. So we are a bit in danger. Yeah, but we will inform you about the situation in Siewierodonetsk afterwards. So be safe in Poland. Hopefully Russian rockets don't strike Polish cities, but they strike Lviv, for example, the most westward city in Ukraine, which is like 50 kilometers from Poland. Thank you guys. See you. Bye bye.
I like that guy.
Yeah, very good.
Isn't he amazing?
He is.
He's almost urbane as he heads into the... He's making a name for himself doing this.
Certainly.
And he's very good.
Very good.
Yeah, you know, I called him, Rafael, our line producer in the studio there, usually gets in touch with him, but I've been writing him a lot, and I was speaking to him earlier and saying, gosh, we really need this report to get out what you're doing. and it's in English, so it reaches a different clientele, or audience rather. Yeah, so that's the result.
Yes, I'm not aware that many of the...
I'm jealous.
Yeah, I'm not aware. Yes, I know,
well.
because you did even think about going. But
Yeah.
I'm not aware that the major networks are producing reports from that far east. You know, everybody seems to be based in Lviv, BBC and everybody
or
else,
Kyiv.
or they nip out to Kyiv occasionally.
There are
But I'm
photo
not-
reporters in
But
these
there don't
areas.
seem to be as many sort of live broadcasts or filmed reports from the easternmost part of the country.
Well, because that's where you have an actual, old-fashioned war where
Well, I know.
shells fall.
Well, I
and kill
know,
people.
but Will is used to old-fashioned wars where shells fall. It didn't
They
stop
do a
him.
few, yeah. But well, I mean, I was in some weird places, but in tough places, but not so much with the conflicts that I was in were not like this in the sense of they didn't have the artillery and all these armaments and rockets that the
Well, because we
Russians
have had cases.
There were more
of-
insurgency.
There have been
type
cases
things.
where the Russians deliberately targeting press. You remember that footage which was on Sky News, for example. Actually, they were filming while they were under fire. They had to leave their car and take refuge in in an old factory.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I was talking to one of the fellows in the control booth before. I was saying that the thing about the war, when you're in the war, is nothing happens, and then suddenly something very bad can happen, just like that,
Exactly.
and you just never know. So you have to minimize your risk because you want to get the story out. If you die, you don't get the story out.
You become
right?
the story.
Yes, and you want to get your story out. So you maybe if this is too dangerous, don't do that story. Wait and get the story later when it's safer. But then there's always unknown factors. There are things that will happen that you cannot control. I remember when I was in Peshawar and getting ready to go down the Khyber Pass, all very dramatic, to cross over into Afghanistan, Jalalabad, where Osama bin Laden was at the time. This is just below Tora Bora before they went there. It was very fluid. There were people there, and then there's people going. You had the Osama bin Laden there, Northern Alliance troops, which was the main force active against, supported by the allies, Western allies, and against Osama bin Laden. These, you had the roadblocks and things. You never knew who was in the roadblock and who would stop you. Very dangerous. And also because, you don't want to get your head cut off.
No,
That's no fun.
not at all.
And so it's a bit scary like that. But then you take calculated chances. But at the same time, while I'm sitting there in that hotel waiting to go over, and it's not just like you just go over. You had to have a lot of steps to go through the border. But a convoy of journalists leaving from Kabul were murdered executed shot in the head on the road coming out. I still went in later after that, but it was some time later when the Northern Alliance had secured Jalalabad. That's when I went in. But that's an example. You're there. These people are coming to your hotel, Green's Hotel. We knew they were coming there, and they're all dead. Because and we don't to this day we're not sure who killed them. And there was Daniel Pearl, of course, who had his head cut off. So these those are different kind of wars because you're fighting. You're not fighting, but the wars between rather conventional forces and then asymmetrical forces. But in this case, and I've said this from the beginning, the enemy is very organized and highly weaponized.
Well, they're highly weaponized. They appear to be less organized than we'd thought.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yes, it's a real war with real.
No, this is of course they're very disorganized in many ways, but it's more conventional war, and so it has totally different problems because when you're being shelled all the time, you just never know when a shell's going to land on you.
Yeah.
This is a totally different thing, and it's very scary. I can imagine.
Of course.
To these people, so I really do.
Very brave.
Have an amazing respect for what Michal and his cameraman are doing. I don't know the cameraman's name, but he said it.
I think his cameraman's Ukrainian, actually, from Ukraine, I think.
That's a good idea, because then he has somebody speaking, and
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, it's always good to have somebody on the ground who's experienced. I had in Afghanistan and in the tribal areas. I did a lot in the tribal areas, which is where a lot of the action was happening, always happening there. That's the border. That's the area between Pakistan and in the mountains between Pakistan and Afghanistan. But it's always good to have a person. I had a very good interpreter who'd been working with the BBC and people like that. And boy, he made things happen. He was just a slight fella. Javid. I've always wondered what happened to him. I lost touch with him. But
Well,
he
let's
was a
say the
great
Taliban
guy.
didn't find him or whoever.
Well, yeah. Now it could be a problem. I was especially thinking of him with this
I mean, this is what they say.
Yeah.
We're rather
situation
But
now.
this is how, particularly in Afghanistan, some of these translators who help the British Army have had terrible difficulty, despite the promises being actually allowed into the United Kingdom as they were promised. And yet, at the same time, we seem powerless to stop these boats of all crossing the channel, these rubber dinghies with all sorts of ne'er-do-wells. And I say ne'er-do-wells, and people say, "Oh, you're being very unfair." But the difference is this. You look at the Ukraine, you look at the people leaving Ukraine, these are women and children, and the men are going in the opposite direction to fight.
Yeah.
You look at the other people arriving across the channel, there are very few women and children and
Yeah.
a lot of young men. So you have to
Yeah.
ask the question, what is going on? And
Yeah.
why is it we seem powerless to control that, notwithstanding the idea we'll send some of them to Rwanda, and yet at the same time people who have actually put their lives on the line for us, and I'm talking particularly in the Afghan context, judges, people who've served in the police, particularly the interpreters for the army, are
You
having
live and
such
die with those people, those interpreters
are
and
having
people like
such
that.
difficulty being
They keep
allowed
you
in. I
alive.
mean, the whole thing has got very, very odd. It seems to me. But
Well-
that's a slight, you know.
This is a subject I would like to cover in depth
But
in
I think
another.
this whole question of
program.
immigration and movement of people is a huge thing which we really have to tackle. Because the reality is, let's assume there are about 7.5 billion people on the planet, okay? Let's assume, and I think the United Nations figures are probably the same, that about 4 billion of those have a bad deal in life because that's just the countries they live in, the climate, the political system, etc., etc., etc. Are we saying, therefore, that Europe has to make home for 4 billion people who suddenly
well,
decide...
the Dalai Lama doesn't agree with that.
No, but a lot of, you know, our,
Dalai
our
Lama thinks Europe
politicians-
should be left alone to be itself.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the point is, because you're saying to every, and there are what, 450 million people in Europe, something like that. So you're saying to every European, you know, you have to be responsible for 10 more human beings.
No, it's worse than this.
Oh,
It's
it is
worse than
much
this.
worse than
It's
that,
worse
isn't
than
it?
this. It's like this. You can take the population of, say, looking at India and just look at India and China. Well, and you said what the population of Europe is like 300 million. United States is around this, a little more than that. And you could send from India the population is 150 million to each place, and they wouldn't even miss them.
Exactly.
Same with China.
Yeah.
There are 1 billion people in China. Forget India, because India's on a better route most of the time, because they do have some reverence for democracy.
I mean, we forget. I mean, this whole question. Sorry, I'm rather leading.
But let me finish my point,
Oh,
if
sorry,
I may,
yes, of
about the
course.
Chinese. Because people forget. See, but this is relative to. I'm going to bring this back to what we're talking about, and with the conversation about the Asian mind last week, that and with the Golden Horde sort of thing, that Eva was bringing up, is. We're worried about China. We see China as our biggest rival. If China is our biggest rival, it's because we've empowered them
Well, that's
to be our
exactly.
biggest rival. Because it was a business decision. We can make a lot of stuff cheaper there than doing it at home and paying our own people. It's always a mistake. Adam Smith agrees with me.
Yes.
Next.
I agree with you. That's true.
This is all.
Reluctantly.
This is
yes.
in Wealth of
reluctantly.
Nations. It's in Wealth of Nations. If you're a
Yes.
capitalist, then this is how you see things. And the other thing is that 1 billion of those people, to take a page out of Mr. George Friedman's book, who's a very wise man, and one of the best prognosticators. Does that mean looking forward to the future? Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yes.
Predicting the future.
Based on data from the past, yes.
Right, yeah, okay. And he makes this point, which I had arrived at just by looking at the numbers. There's about 1 billion people in China who live in the Stone Age, relatively. Severe, diabolical poverty. And about 400 million people who live kind of like Europe, right? Whereas they have a middle class within this group. But then you have all this billion of people. What happens if that gets destabilized? China falls.
Yes.
Not that hard to destabilize them if you want to make a thing of it.
No.
But right now we don't, because we're using them to manufacture this.
Which is a big mistake.
Those slaves are manufacturing for us. But when we decide to create the slave revolt,
I mean, that's actually, you make...
I say we, but I mean,
it was
you know,
obviously said for
with
different purposes,
propaganda,
but that was
etc.
always one of Marine Le Pen's more interesting statements. She said, why should we let the slaves of the third world make and sell goods to the unemployed in our country? I mean, that's actually, I mean...
I didn't know she'd made that point.
She had made that point in one of her, not this election, I think it was an election before, but I mean, it is, in a sense, and you and I have discussed this before, the political and the economic elites of the West, particularly starting in the United States, have actually betrayed their nations because they have actually moved manufacturing abroad out of the United States, and yet they've left the costs in sort of social devastation behind. And this is a misunderstanding.
Well, they took the work away and just gave people drugs to make them forget about
but this
it.
Is this is a misunderstanding.
Or created that climate.
Between the difference between free trade, which Adam Smith advocated.
Well, Adam Smith said you had to protect your own workers.
And globalization, which is something rather different, because in simplistic terms, I see globalization as where large manufacturers shift the costs of production to the taxpayer of the country they're abandoning. Yeah. So they expect, you know, so if I say, okay, I'll make this T-shirt or these pair of jeans in China, it means I can go to Walmart and buy these jeans for $5 cheaper or whatever it is, okay? Yeah. But the point is, because those jeans used to be made in Alabama or somewhere...
I'd pay more just to have them made at home.
I will end up paying more than... I wouldn't say $5, because the social dislocation, which will have a cost, ultimately, will be more than $5. So I've saved $5 on jeans, and I'm paying $10 more in taxes.
Right.
And that difference, of course, is going into the hands of shareholders.
Ivo wants to jump in.
Let
Ivo jump in.
But that difference is going to the shareholders of the country who've actually, you know, set up their holding company in a tax beneficial jurisdiction somewhere else. So everybody loses out.
A point well made. Jump in.
Well, I think it comes from a certain naivete, because I believe that it was the US who set up a free trading system and vouched for its integrity after the Bretton Woods and after the Second World War, etc., etc. And part of the thinking,
you have to make it quickly because we run out of time.
Part of the thinking was that that it is through free trade that those civilizationally different areas will sort of, through osmosis, assume our values.
But in fact, you're right.
I've got to cut you off. We're out of time.
But that was the hope. But the reality is, we've actually made these people wealthy, so they haven't. There's been no osmosis. We've given the Chinese Communist Party more power.
I've got to stop you both. I've got to stop you. I hate to do it. We were just getting our trousers off, and we've got to stop. We've got to stop.
Okay.
We were just getting into it, just warming up. Thank you, everybody, for watching this edition. I want to thank of There's a Will. I want to thank my guest, Nicholas Richardson, no relation, unfortunately, and Ivo Bender, also no relation, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for a stimulating conversation. The time just flew by, and we have to go. Thanks for watching. Like us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and we'll see you next show. Thanks for watching.